Hello and welcome, Exiles, to my quick and dirty guide on how to League start a Righteous Fire character and my top recommendations. The first one is the Fire Mastery that gives you regen based on your fire res. This is the number above 0, the number in parentheses. So if you have 75 max res, but you have like 300 fire res, it's going to give you 300 flat regen. Generally, I always recommend going straight to this node. If you're a Templar, I would spec straight through here, straight over here, and I would grab the mastery from the first fire cluster I got to. Same thing with Elementalist or a Witch Start. I would be going straight up, straight through here, straight to the fire res mastery there. And if I was a Juggernaut or a Marauder start, say they rework Chieftain and make it not bad, I honestly would be going straight through these strength nodes, straight to Arsonist, and straight to that mastery. The reason why is I like to start Righteous Fire as soon as I can. That's level 16. All you really need to League start it is you need to get yourself some Ruby Rings. They can be bought from the vendor by either buying Iron Rings or Ruby Rings outright, and take the Iron Ring and sell it with a red gem from the vendor in Act 1 Nessa. You can buy a red gems for 1 Wisdom Scroll, vendor that will give you Ruby Res Ring. Then all you really need is just to bench craft Fire Res. The Fire Res craft costs 1 transmute. The way you get transmutes on League Start is every time you kill a monster and they drop a blue item or a yellow item, you pick it up and you sell it to the vendor without IDing it. That will always give you back transmute shards, and it stacks up over time as you kill the various bosses. The one basically caveat to that is, if it's a gear slot you don't have a rare item for yet, I usually ID it just to try to start getting rare items into my build as I level up through the campaign. But that is what I would recommend as my top prioritization early on in the league, to League start Righteous Fire, because you can right out the gate. This allows you to put on Righteous Fire the second you have that mastery and you have some good fire res, as it will sustain you all the way in the early acts, all the way to your first lab, and even your second lab. And by that point, most of the Ascendancies I'm going to recommend to you will have extra regen built into the Ascendancy that will help carry the Righteous Fire from there on out. Number 2 most important with Righteous Fire is, how do you get good damage early? It's pretty simple. In Act 3, you get Flammability. Always use Flammability when doing a boss. It's a big difference in damage. And number 2 is, use a secondary DPS skill. Scorching Ray, rough numbers are right here. Fire Trap, rough numbers are here. Ultimately, they end up being pretty similar damage. The one big difference is Fire Trap says you can be mobile, you can throw a trap, move, throw a trap, move. Scorching Ray says, I stand here and I shoot. That being said, you can still Frostblink to dodge every now and then if you need to. It's not as stationary as one would think, but it is still a bit more mobile. I do believe Scorching Ray ends up being a slightly higher damage because Righteous Fire, the more multiplier applies to the whole 4K, whereas for Fire Trap, it only applies to the 3K, and then on top of it, you get an extra 10 exposure. I'm not 100% sure. They're very similar, but ultimately, one is mobile, one requires you to stand still. I prefer Scorching Ray, but if you don't care about the playstyle, objectively, I believe Fire Trap is a bit stronger. That being said, let's look at Righteous Fire links. If you're starting off and you want to know what do I put as my supports, the priority is always Burning Damage, Ellie Focus. That's your 3 link. And then for your 4th link, that's when you start to have basically a deviation in, do I want to have more single target or do I want to have a bit better clear? And it's basically just efficacy if you want more single target, ink AoE if you want clear. And then when you go to a 5 link, it becomes, do you want more clear? If you do, then you're doing efficacy with ink AoE. But if you want single target, you have to do Life Tap and Swift Affliction. Swift Affliction by itself does not work with Righteous Fire. You need Life Tap in order to give Righteous Fire, the main Righteous Fire, not just Valor, the duration tag, and let Swift Affliction support it. So hence, Life Tap is always attached to your Swift Affliction usage. And then 6th link, basically, if you want to go clear, you go ink AoE. If you want damage, you go efficacy. That's a pretty simple breakdown for it. Number 3 is about early aura prioritization. Now, I know you might think Purity of Fire is what you want to go for. It sounds thematically like the right choice, but ultimately, I do not recommend it early until you get ailment mitigation. Ailments are much more dangerous than a little bit of extra max fire res, because when it's low level, Purity of Fire only gives like 1 max res, then 2 max res, then 3 max res, and not even until you're like level 20 Purity of Fire, which is you're like a level 90 character, does it get to 4 max res. Ultimately, what I recommend is prioritize Purity of Elements first for that ailment immunity, and then as you get Pantheons completed or you get gearing that mitigates Freeze, Chill, and Shock, at that point you can swap out a Purity of Elements. Not only that, Purity of Elements helps you capture your eyes really easy, really early on. It's fantastic for League Start, in my opinion. And basically, it's pretty much a matter of, I recommend Purity of Elements plus Vitality, and then once you get the first mastery that gives you max res, I usually go Arrogance for Vitality, and then do Determination plus Purity of Elements. And then after the fact, as you min-max your gear a bit more, you get a bit more reservation efficiency in your build, you can start to work in other auras like Purity of Fire, Malevolence, and Skitterbots as you drop Purity of Elements. Stuff like that is what you can go for in the future. And for number 4, we have how do you go fast with Righteous Fire. Pretty simple. Take your movement skill, Shield Charge, put momentum, and put faster attacks on that. Weave your shield charges with Frost Blinks, and you'll be cooking through the map. Not only that, but also add in Blood Rage. It's 10% attack speed just while it's active, and on top of that, it gives you Frenzy Charges, which is another 12% attack speed and 12% more damage. Super underrated. Don't forget to do Blood Rage. You only need a level 1, and it'll work great. After that, Infernal Cry. If you can get Called Arms in your build, just put that on left click, and you'll be having a nice little explosion about every 8 seconds, because that's the base cooldown, I believe, of Infernal Cry. And not only that, it gives you a little bit more single target, because it gives enemies covered in ash. Fantastic add-in to the build. I would highly recommend it. After all of that, I highly recommend Vow Righteous Fire. It has a big downside. It takes out 60% of your life pool. It eats it up. Usually, I'd recommend timing that with a life flask for some big, massive sustain right when you press it. But ultimately, if you're just zipping through a map, most of the time, enemies aren't going to hit you. And it's just a nice, big extra AoE, big extra damage, and allows you to fly and cruise through a map. And I would highly recommend it. You'll die a few times depressing it at the wrong time, but believe me when I say it's really worth it. Last but not least, number 5, Ascendancy Tree Template Recommendations. I basically outlined the standard go-to best way to path Righteous Fire builds with my 3 recommendations. They are a Inquisitor, a Juggernaut, and an Elementalist. In my notes section, I go over basically their specialties. Inquisitor is, in my opinion, the easiest feels good sustain, and it kind of has a mid-tier damage because at least it has some nodes that give you damage. The small nodes give you % damage. They have the node that makes enemies take increased damage. There is damage there. Number 2, I have best defense, good sustain, lowest damage. That's the Juggernaut, of course. And then the best damage, lowest defense, mid sustain, best transition to an explode setup is the Elementalist. If you're going to League Start, these are the 3 Ascendancies I think do it well. Other ones I don't think do well for the reasons listed below. If you're curious, you can look at them. Ultimately, the one special case here is Guardian. I think the new Guardian could be a really good low-life Righteous Fire Guardian, so I'm considering League starting either a Guardian life base and just full send it, or I'll start Inquisitor and I'll respec a Guardian, because I think the low-life Righteous Fire Guardian could be really cool, but I'll make a separate build guide on that. And then last but not least, basically the prioritization of gear stats. How do I wager out what stuff is worthwhile in my build? These are pretty much the stats you want to look for. Life, regen rate, res, regen, dot multi, fire, dot multi, % burn damage, % fire damage, and then, if you can get it, +1 level 2 fire spell / all spell. That's the stuff you care about when it comes to gear stats. And then great early uniques are basically, these are just common uniques that are quite good for RF early on. You don't want every single item in your build to be uniques. Really, you want a lot of rares, because rares are quite good. But if you can tag these in, they get you cruising early, in my opinion, and they're usually pretty cheap, which is Pyre, Immortal Flush, Primnor, and Rise of the Phoenix. There's a few other ones. You can look over uniques and kind of make your own list, but these are the ones that I think are just early, easy items to throw in your build to try to get you that little extra boost of cruising through the content. Hopefully this breakdown of what I prioritize and what I think are the most important things to know when it comes to Righteous Fire helps out your Righteous Fire League start. If you choose to start it, in my opinion, it's the best feeling, League start. It feels so good, super smooth. Righteous Fire, in my opinion, it falls off later in damage when you get to the high gear investment, but early League, it's pretty competitive damage-wise, while also being just a really feels good build to play. So, I wanted to share this with you, so that way, if you guys were curious about what to prioritize when it comes to League starting Righteous Fire, that's how it's done. These are the basic tree outlines, but specialize it to your own personal plan of how you want to build your character. As always, thanks for watching, take care, Exiles, and peace out.